Hello, everyone. Welcome. I am Lori Wallach, the director of the Rethink Trade program at American Economic Liberties Project. Thanks for joining this briefing on tariffs. This briefing is going to provide basic policy training about what tariffs are and how they operate. As a policy matter, a lot of the conventional wisdom about tariffs, the value of their various uses, the role they played in the Biden administration's industrial policy, which has led to the biggest surge of investment in factory construction in 30 years, how they relate to prices. They do not always translate to higher consumer prices. It's very important because a lot of what you hear is spun up messaging, not the facts. And it's a spin up that's supposed to demonize the use of this very legitimate policy tool. The question is, like any tool, how do you use it? So when we all say we are for strong labor enforcement and trade agreements, or environmentalists, you say you're for border adjustment. We are saying we are for tariffs. That enforcement is through tariffs. That is the tool you use for trade enforcement. Tariffs are an important defense. So you're basically not allowing market demand to be filled by stuff that is made with crappy labor standards, dumping on the environment, subsidies, and other kinds of cheating. But point two, tariffs alone will not fix the problems that we have with production, with economic justice, with our resilience in the economy. And we saw that because Trump put tariffs alone in place in 2018, sizable ones. We didn't see a boost in manufacturing construction. It required the rest of what the Democrats did, the Inflation Reduction Act, the CHIPS Act, infrastructure, generating consumer demand with consumer side tax credits, having tax credits for manufacturing incentives, actual investment, procurement policies, that industrial policy package with tariffs as the defense. So then what the heck does that mean for prices? There is a very important National Bureau of Economic Research studies with the China tariffs. And what they found is price, it didn't get passed to consumers. Tariffs are charged on the wholesale price. So you can figure out if there will be a price impact. The price impact is very minimal if there's a large margin. So the Nike shoes that are 120 bucks, they're 120 bucks because market research shows that's what we'll pay. The landed shoe imported at wholesale is 20 bucks. You put a 20% tariff on that, you've added $4. So you got $24 of cost. It's going to get eaten because they know if they make a $125 shoe, less people will buy them. The margin is big, the price isn't passed on. When the margin is small and there is competition in a sector and a seller or producer wants to keep market share, the tariff is not passed on. The wholesale price, the company buying it for a part or the company retailing it, eats the price. And of course, if it's across the board, that's harder. If it's targeted, it's even easier, but it's never a one-for-one translation. So you can't just multiply the tariff times the amount of trade and divide it by households. That is not at all how it works. Now, for all of this info on the actual sites, there's a fact sheet, rethinktrade.org. That's rethinktrade.org is a fact sheet in all of this. Number two, we're going to provide political guidance about how to talk about tariffs, or anyway, what not to say about tariffs. The word tariffs has taken a symbolic meaning as an indicator of political solidarity, as standing up for me on trade, almost like it's an indicator of anti-NAFTA. So how one talks about it is very important. After Democrats were ensnared in Trump's tariff trap, and I call it that because he uses the tariff issue as bait, they took a bite again in 2024 and let Trump, who did not follow through on his trade-related campaign promises the first time, come off as the populist economic guy, standing up for working people. And given the symbolic value of tariffs, and how candidate Harris looked as anti-tariff, sent the wrong kind of signal to a lot of voters. And so we're going to start out with Congressman Chris Deluzio, Pennsylvania 17, that's Western Pennsylvania, who has done an amazing job getting this kind of messaging connected to the right policies. In that, Congressman Deluzio is a person who, as a frontliner, actually increased his margin in 2024 running in Western Pennsylvania. It is my honor to introduce Congressman Chris Deluzio.
Thanks, Lori, and hi, everybody. Great to be on. I see some friends from Labor. I see Congresswoman Debbie Dingell, and I know some others. So great to be with this crowd. Lori, thanks for the nice introduction. Look, I'll tell you about where I'm from and how I saw these issues play out in Western Pennsylvania, in my part of the Rust Belt. And I say that knowing that everybody loves that phrase. I use it. I think it's a badge of honor for us and what we had and what we can make again. My district. I surround Pittsburgh. I stretch out to the Ohio and West Virginia borders. I've got a heck of a lot of good mill towns and places that make steel that used to make more steel. And so when Lori talked about NAFTA and tariffs and the way that Mr. Trump and Ms. Harris were using or talking about those issues, my district and my constituents understand them deeply across generations. And I'll say this, right? I'm a guy, and I'm not alone in this in Washington, who has supported President Biden continuing and strengthening the tariffs on China, for instance, around steel. Who thinks that the bipartisan neoliberal approach on trade has been a bad deal for the folks who I represent. You ask people in my region, in my district, was trading multi-generational solid union steelmaking jobs worth cheaper stuff at Walmart and precarious service sector employment at best? The answer is no, and that's true for a lot of people in this country. And I think, and Lori and I'm sure Debbie and others will talk about this, but tariffs are a tool that we have that we should use strategically and aggressively to reorient trade with countries like China that don't follow the rules. That should be part of the things that we have at our disposal in this government to stand up for industry, to stand up for workers, to stand up for our planet. And I think there has been a knee-jerk reaction by too many Democrats who simply respond because it's something that Donald Trump has done and say it is a bad thing. And in this case, across the board criticisms of tariffs. And I think that is a mistake. I'm not just talking politics, I'm talking policy. And I think we've seen how strategic and smart tariffs can work. And the Biden administration has been an example of that. And look, it has to go hand in hand with industrial policy to reorient our supply chains back home to make more stuff in this country. Has to go hand in hand with a strong labor movement and better protections for workers to have the freedom to form and join a union. I'm not interested in domestic labor arbitrage. I'm not interested in international labor arbitrage, nor am I interested in seeing us outsource our pollution, which is often what happens when we say that China gets to make things instead of us making it here. We can compete. We should compete fairly. And I think we have to have the right way to talk about this. And that's the messaging, but we also have to have good policy positions. I know those are fights to come. So I will tell you, as a guy who just won and ran in tough terrain in Pennsylvania, we can win as Democrats on these issues. And in my district, like much of Pennsylvania, things swung toward Mr. Trump top of ticket. But Beaver County, the county in my district with more of the mill towns, more of a working class population, that swung more towards Trump, and it's also where I overperformed the most. And so I feel strongly, and Bob Casey overperformed there too. I feel strongly that we as Democrats, when we run aggressively on these economic issues, we can win. We can do this. And so I think we have a lot of work to do. I'm proud to be in this fight with you guys. Lori, I'll kick it back to you.
Thank you very much, Congressman Deluzio. And it is now my honor to introduce Congresswoman Debbie Dingell, who represents Michigan 12. She's also the chair of the House Democratic Policy and Communications Committee. Notably, Congresswoman Dingell predicted in 2016 that Trump would win based on listening to her voters in Michigan. She has been a wizard of hearing what voters are saying, understanding what they're thinking, and trying to help the Democratic Party communicate in a way that makes sense and make policies that actually work for working people. Congresswoman Dingell, please.
Lori, thank you. And thank you for putting this all together and bringing us together to talk about this. And I love being here with Chris, who is my colleague, but somebody that's in this fight with me. And in Pennsylvania is much like Michigan, what has happened to many of the small communities that are still the backbone of the American economy. And they need to see us fighting for them. They need to see policies that are supporting workers here in this country. And Chris is just a fighter at the forefront of all of it. And I love being with him. But I'm going to build on what he said, which is, and this is what I've been saying from the beginning, tariffs are a tool in the toolbox we need to use. Not all tariffs are good. Blanket tariffs aren't good, but for certain industries, and it happens to be the ones that Chris and I have probably the most experience with, but in manufacturing, in autos, in steel, we are not playing on a level playing field. In 2016, it was NAFTA. I'm going to tell you point blank, Democrats did a terrible job about talking about trade in 2016. Nobody would listen to me. I can remember when Hillary came to Michigan in August, and I said to her, if you don't go out and in that hall, make it perfectly clear that you're going to fight for those jobs, you are not going to let NAFTA screw them, you're going to work to bring the supply chains back, you are going to lose this election. And she was strong that day, but it wasn't enough. We didn't talk about how NAFTA has shipped jobs overseas, what had happened to how many closed plants there were, and what happened to our supply chain. And Donald Trump was an expert at understanding people's insecurities, people's fears, their angst, that how many communities that we all represent, that we live in, have empty plants. I had an empty steel plant for 20 years, McLeod Steel, that just sat there. Nobody was doing anything with it. It was a daily reminder that everybody drove by how we had shipped our supply chain overseas and weren't supporting the steel industry in this country. And so I'm going to tell you all right now, I said this at a meeting yesterday, I'm going to work, I've said I will work with Donald Trump on tariffs because we worked together after he got elected on rewriting NAFTA, revising it, which is how the next generation USMCA came to be. And unfortunately, it still needs to be tweaked and it needs changes because right now there are loopholes in it. Like China could build a plant in Mexico and then bring what's built there into this country and call it a North American product. And that is not what we should be doing. We have to change USMCA to be able to do that. But we also need to address China, period, and what they are doing. First, I want to say we're competing in a global marketplace. We've got to be competitive. But we've already seen in the world and what's happened in Europe with what China has done to that country and how they worked around the tariffs that were there. And the fact of the matter is, Joe Biden did it, and Donald Trump will do it, and I will be the leader of the pack in supporting and fighting for 100% or more tariff on China and bringing automobiles into this country. And let me tell you why. Here's the reality, my friends. China is trying to destroy our manufacturing industries. The autos and steels are the two that Chris and I talk about the most. They subsidize, they put money into it to keep a lower cost. They pay their workers nothing. They do not pay their workers a fair wage. They use slave labor, as some of you know, in some places. They don't have environmental standards. They don't have workplace and safety standards. We're not playing on a level playing field. And what we know they want to do is come in, destroy, put our industries out of business, and then come in, jack up prices and screw the consumer. And that is what we cannot do. So, and the fact of the matter is, while we've made progress, our supply chains have not come back to this country in the way that they need to. And it's not only an economic security issue, a jobs issue, it is a national security issue. Do you think that we should not have the capability to make our own steel in this country, to have the backbone of our American economy? We saw what happened during COVID, when all of a sudden we didn't have masks or gloves or gowns to take care of our hospital workers. How much of our medicine is made right now in China or India? We need to be bringing that home, and we need a level playing field, and we need trade policies that support doing that and don't support countries that are subsidizing, undercutting, using slave labor, and working around existing tariffs. China has subsidized its competitive edge for decades. They're now the world's largest car exporter. with their production costs are more than almost 30 to 40% lower than the OEMs here because of the way that they're doing the subsidization. OEMs driven by China's dominance in the battery supply chains, and what they're doing in the with the reduced labor cost, not paying their employees a decent or fair wage, and their material expenses are done. So we've got to, we're not on a level playing field, and we got to be able to talk to people about that. And here's what bothers me, because I am a car girl. I'm going to look at all of you and tell you, a car girl. The auto industry has been the backbone of the American economy for more than a century, and we've got to keep it there. It provides jobs, it provides economic security, it provides national security. But just a couple of days ago, it was reported that the Chinese automaker BYD has had their fastest growing month in 2024, setting them up to exceed its global annual sales goal and overtake Ford. BYD is on course to sell more than 4 million vehicles because of the Chinese government's support of it. We got to have a level playing field. That's all that we are asking for. So I think it's really important for us to talk about this. I think it's got to be targeted. And the other thing that I'm really worried about is that that we have to make sure that the Commerce Department, that Trump's and appointees understand and are talking about how tariffs can make a difference. And I don't know either of them, to be perfectly frank. I found it very easy to work with Bob Lighthizer. He listened and he understood. But we got to make sure that they're not only focused on tariffs, but we got to produce for goods that the U.S. already produces. We got to worry that they don't create any new tariffs that's going to hurt us. And let's talk. Chris will talk to you about this. Steel. We should not be letting us have another merger. We need to be looking at the whole picture of trade and how we make sure we have a level playing field with. So I guess my lesson to you is don't be afraid of tariffs, but it's one tool in the toolbox. We got a lot of trade policy, and I view this as an opportunity to strengthen manufacturing in this country, bring jobs back home, bring our supply chain back home, and help support these communities that have been devastated by bad trade policies. With that, I yield back, Lori.
Thank you, Congresswoman Dingell. And we're going to hear more about the policy uses of these tools, but basically to speak to how the opinion research actually backs up and makes more universal the members' experience of how people in their own districts hear this, we're going to hear from David Merriman. He's a partner at Lake Associates, and he has done a lot of polling for a lot of Democrats, but also has been the lead pollster on the Factory Towns Project, which if folks haven't seen it, Google it, look for it. It's a very interesting set of opinion research and scholarship that gets to the question of what the hell is the Democratic Party? If we lose, counted either way, working class people, people without a college education, or people making under $100,000, which we did in this last election cycle, and where those folks are living, how they are reacting. As he's about to start, I just want to remind folks about the study from 2022 that David Autor and the whole China Shock team did, where they cross-polling data and precinct level job loss data, and they found, and this is the whole thing about when tariffs crossed over at their symbolic value, even when tariffs did not deliver jobs, did not fix people's problems when Trump used them in the first instance, it did not matter. Symbolically, they saw shifts to the Republicans, who are now viewed as the pro-tariff, pro-worker, pro-fair trade team, which we know is ironic, given the results of what Trump did and did not deliver, versus what Biden did deliver. So with that, please, David Merriman.
Thanks, Lori, and it's a thrill to be on the panel with all of you and leaders and sort of shifting our direction on these critically important issues. And it's absolutely the case, as noted, that this Factory Towns research, which I should acknowledge my partner Celinda Lake, the head of our firm, We've been doing that work in partnership for the last few years now, with my thoughts at American Family Voices, looking at these smaller cities, manufacturing-based cities, mostly in the Midwest, that have been where we have seen the sharpest change politically in the results in those places compared to any other counties in the country, shifting from Democrats to Republicans, partly based on just economic misery and bad economic situations in those places, but also a recognition that, in their view, the Democratic Party has not stand up for them, has not fought for them, but they've been the party of free trade, not fair trade, and that at least Trump and the Republicans are standing up for them, or perceived to be in this particular area. An exception to that is Pennsylvania 17, and great to be on here with Chris Deluzio. We did this polling, and we saw the actual overperformance of not only of Chris and his great work in the district, but also the messaging that he was doing about standing up to the corporate jagoffs and standing up for American workers and rebuilding manufacturing in this country. I'm going to just share with you a little bit on screen some of the just data we collected recently on attitudes toward tariffs more broadly, and then a little bit from that factory towns data. But I'll just take a couple minutes, and there's more behind all of this, of course. Hang on, let me give 1 second, because it is not showing the way I need it to. Okay, now, apologies. All right, you all see that on the screen? So this is just a few quick highlights from recent data on tariffs and trade, recognizing that, again, there's a lot to this, and what you do in terms of policy and what tariffs are, how they actually work, makes a huge difference in how they actually play out. But in terms of the perception and politics, we would say generally people have had mostly positive attitudes toward tariffs in this election year, and we saw that early in the year, and we were kind of raising the flag and warning Democrats as best we could that this was something that voters cared about, that it was a net positive for those who were talking about it. And of course, Trump is the one who's most visibly been talking about it. But slim majorities, slightly over 50%. You have a quarter or so weren't sure what tariffs were about or what they meant, but generally 2-to-1 in favor early in the year. It actually shifted in a more negative direction toward the fall, but a lot of that is because, in those lower bars you see on this screen are the shift in a little bit more negative direction on tariffs, but really that has to do with the partisan polarization around the election. And because tariffs became associated with Trump and Republicans, partisan Democrats tended to move against them. A lot of uncertainty about what tariffs really are and what they would actually do, but definitely a sense that if it's Trump's idea, partisan Democrats are against it, partisan Republicans were for it. So you saw more polarization on it, but with that baseline of basically slim majorities being in favor across the country. People are uncertain and mixed about how the costs of tariffs play out. You have a plurality who think it is U.S. consumers who would be who would bear the cost of tariffs, but that tends to be more among Democrats now, again, because they're associated with Trump. But there's also belief that foreign exporters, foreign governments, U.S. importers would pay the costs of that. There's a recognition that there are costs involved, but there's also benefits in the sense of standing up for American workers and voters. And when you look at what people like about tariffs, they're much more in clear agreement that the number one thing they like when they hear about tariffs is having tariffs to protect or grow domestic industries for economic reasons. But that's the fundamental idea behind why people would want tariffs. It is more strongly held currently among Republicans, but also particularly independent voters believing that. Democrats more mixed, again, because they're viewing tariffs as being associated with Trump. But the reasons are, the number one reason across all of those voters is to protect and help grow domestic industries for economic reasons. That's how Chris Deluzio talks about it. That's how Congresswoman Dingell talks about it. And of course, it's the reason to be for good tariff policy if in fact it can be done in a way to support domestic industries. People also want to do that for national security reasons, to use them as leverage in policy negotiations, to lower the trade deficit. But the core fundamental reason that people support tariffs is wanting to grow domestic industries. And this is polling. I won't share the proprietary message polling from Congressman Deluzio's campaign, but one question we got to ask on his in his poll, because he was so focused on this and because we knew this is so important to voters in Western Pennsylvania, is what is it that we're talking about when we say we want to hold wealthy CEOs and corporations accountable? And the Democrats generally have nibbled at this messaging and tried to talk about it, but they haven't been real clear about what they're talking about doing. The main reason people want to hold corporations accountable is to ensure that they protect American jobs. All three of those words very important in terms of what people want to do. More so than tax fairness, more so than price gouging, which we talked a lot about this year, more so than kind of workplace regulation. It's fundamentally they want to protect American jobs, and that's the number one thing that was found in Pennsylvania 17. It's the number one thing we found across the region and in the swing states, and that's what people want to do. And then one little bit of message data. This is from that Factory Towns project. Remember, we were looking at small to medium-sized cities that were manufacturing based in the Midwest, which are the exact places where Democrats have lost the most votes. Just saw new data from Wisconsin this morning confirming that the 6 cities where we lost, Trump made the most gains in this election relative to Democrats are small to medium manufacturing cities in Wisconsin. In those places across the country, only 2, we had several, we tried lots and lots of different kinds of messaging, trying to just regain some of the idea that of having a strong democratic economic message to these voters. The number 2 messages that actually worked, the number 1 and 2 messages that actually worked and resonated with those voters in these factory towns. And this was earlier in the year, and we were waving our arms and trying to push Democrats to talk more about this. One was retirement security, which is a fundamental thing that people really recognize they have lost and that they're deeply worried about. And second is a trade message. And the trade message is actually the strongest in terms of reaching the most voters and second highest in terms of intensity in the factory towns. And the content of that message is global. It goes straight at trade deals and how they've hurt American workers. Global trade deals were supposed to bring us good jobs and lower prices. They sent our jobs overseas, gave us higher prices and lower wages. We need to crack down on price gouging, get tough on the Chinese government, invest in infrastructure, clean water, strengthen supply chains, all the things you just heard Congresswoman Dingell and Congressman Deluzio talk about. We need leaders who will reduce our dependence on foreign manufacturing, build things here at home, invest in American workers and good union jobs. To the extent people think tariffs are a tool that can get us to this, that's what they want, and they very strongly respond to it, to whoever's saying it. And in this case, they heard it more from one side than the other, which is causing the political results we're seeing. So that's a taste of what we're getting in the opinion data. Happy to talk more about it as we wrap up, but thank you.
Thank you very much. Very helpful. And now we're going to turn to some labor leaders who have seen on the ground, talking to their members, working on the policy, but also getting the frontline experience of talking to workers about what they think about these issues. And we're going to start with Hassan Solomon, who is the legislative and political director of the International Association of Machinists. He has been in the fight for trade justice for many, many years and speaks from practical and legal experience. Hassan, please.
Thank you, Laura. I appreciate it. As you stated, I'm the proud legislative and political director of the Machinists and Aerospace Workers. We are the largest defense and aerospace union in North America, representing over 400,000 active and retired members. We represent workers at Boeing, Lockheed Martin, General Dynamics, Raytheon, Caterpillar, and John Deere, and many, many more. To our union membership, U.S. trade policy is the game. And the rules of that game are written by the president and Congress. And unfortunately, for too long, as far as our membership is concerned, those rules have been written for Wall Street to win and manufacturing workers to lose. And all we simply want is shared prosperity. If our employers are getting record profits, we believe that we should get record contracts. If our employers are growing, we believe our union membership is growing. But unfortunately, the reality is that's not the case. As I mentioned earlier, I represent 400,000 workers. I've been with the Machinist Union over 20 years. When I started as a young lobbyist, a young lawyer with the machinists, 1999, we had 800,000 workers. Now, half our membership, that loss was not the result of just innovation and technological manufacturing advances. A lot of it was poor, flawed trade policy. That cost us our jobs. Now, beginning with the passage of NAFTA in 1994, we lost approximately 50,000 aerospace jobs, high-skilled jobs to Mexico. And then it was followed by the inclusion of China into WTO. China has continued to play by its own rules, as you heard by Representative Dingell earlier, manipulating its currency, providing companies with hidden subsidies, and also requiring our employers to share their technology in exchange for access to the Chinese market. And most importantly, using tariffs to gain an advantage over our employers, to gain an advantage over our workers. Now, China is the world's top exporter. Now, I'm not a trade expert, I'm a trade unionist. But why can't we use specific tariffs and trade policy to give our employers, to give our workers a competitive advantage? Or at least, as you heard from Representative Dingell, level the playing field. That's what's important to our membership, having an opportunity to compete. Now, China is always looking to replace our imported U.S. manufacturing goods with their domestic Chinese production. Now, are we willing to work with President Trump? Yes, we are. Our members, we allow them to decide who we endorse for president, and 60% of them endorsed Kamala Harris. 40% supported Donald Trump. We are willing to work with anyone in this administration or in Congress that will promote a trade policy that benefits our union membership, that benefits our high-skilled workforce. Now, we are the only union that strongly opposed Trump's USMCA because we knew that it was not going to do anything to address our concerns regarding aerospace. Now, when Trump was campaigning and promoting his NAFTA 2.0, he told our membership that it would end the offshoring of our jobs. Since Trump was in office in 2016, we lost over 50 manufacturing plants, and that list continues to grow. When we look and we evaluate the renegotiated USMCA, we're going to be looking at its impact on aerospace and industries that impact our membership. Now, Representative Deluzio and Representative Dingell, I like to consider them allies of the Machinists Union. They're not friends when it comes to trade power. They're allies. Because see, the friends in Washington, D.C., those are the ones who screw you. The allies think just like us. I have not once in my 20 years had to go to the Dingells or the Deluzio's office to lobby trade policy because they think just like us. And we need more. If a member of Congress wants to support these flawed trade agreements, wants to support agreements that benefits China and Mexico, I'm going to tell them point blank, don't come to us for campaign support or campaign contributions. You need to go to Mexico and China where you're voting to send our jobs. Thank you, Lori Wallach and Rethink Trade and our allies, Deluzio and Dingell, for having us participate today.
Thank you very, very much, Hassan. And the experience of our union colleagues and friends who are living with the results of these policies, but talking to their members is extremely important for us to pay attention to. So I'm very honored to introduce our next speaker, Jason Wade, who is the top assistant to the United Auto Workers president, Sean Fain. Please, Jason.
All right, thank you, everyone. So I just kind of want to talk about, I mean, I thought Mr. Merman's presentation on the polling was really instructive. I mean, a lot of that is the work we've been doing for over 40 years, explaining that free trade is a bad deal for workers, not only in this country, but in all countries. So when you see, UAW members, UAW households coming out against trade and in support of tariffs, that's the echo of past work. And really, a lot of the predictions we made around NAFTA or granting China MFN status and entering the WTO has come to, we were more right than wrong. 90,000 closed factories later, most workers in the Midwest know that NAFTA was a bad deal. 65 final assembly plants and propulsion plants later closed and moved offshore, we know that it was a bad deal. So it was instructive that you saw healthcare or retirement healthcare as number one, trade is number two. And one of the reasons, trade doesn't only affect our jobs and closing down our plants, it erodes the conditions inside our facilities. More of our members and more working class peoples are working 12-hour a day jobs. Less people have pensions. I mean, in the 80s, it was 40% of Americans had pensions. Now it's in the single digits. Very few working Americans have retiree health care anymore. Those are all downward pressures due to trade. And what this means is we spend an enormous amount of time at the bargaining table fighting around job security. We try to get product into our plants. We try to fight against, layoffs and anything like that. But our trade laws, and they say this at the table, all of the big three said this at the table. And every organizing drive we have in manufacturing, we hear this. If you try to reattain the conditions you had in the last century, we will ship your jobs overseas. We will move these jobs to Mexico. And it was as blunt as that. The companies know that they have leverage over us on these issues, and they're using it. And the interesting thing is, we did have overwhelming support for Harris, but where we saw softer support is in those facilities where there's constant pressure and threats of layoffs or moving work south. You know, our members trust, despite Trump not delivering, they trust his messaging on at least recognizing their pain and saying, I'm going to put 300% tariffs on John Deere. Whether that's practical or real, they feel seen. And that's a huge thing because a lot of our members, a lot of these working people haven't felt seen for the last 40, 50 years. So, a lot of this is, echoing what Representative Dingell said, we are going to support positive actions that the next administration wants to make on raising the MFN rates and raising tariffs. We openly and continuously ask the Biden administration to make smart moves on tariff rates because, what's not talked about is that the U.S. MFN rate on most durable goods is zero or close to zero, and most other Western industrialized countries, it's in the 10 to 20%. So there is a model out there that you can have high tariffs and high prosperity. It's just we're not following it. And just kind of like setting the stage for the next year and a half of thinking about tariffs, we will be going heavy on the USMCA renegotiation. We're actually interested in maybe the deal that President Clinton suggested was possible, that wages for Mexican workers would be raised, that manufacturing jobs in the U.S. would increase. We're not willing to concede and not willing to give Trump the space in this renegotiation to allow corporate America to continue to write the laws that govern our families and our communities. And if we can't get there and we can't get those standards up, we're going to be fully advocating for withdrawing from that agreement because it's been a disaster for our members. So again, we'll be, part of this is Trump capturing a lot of the union angst over the last several decades over what we feel is bad trade laws and bad labor laws, because NAFTA or downward pressure on trade has done more to erode our standards in our facilities than a lot of the other policies. If we're constantly fighting and they're saying, hey, if you don't do this, we're going to ship this work, that has a much bigger effect than other policies. So we're going to be engaging in this, and we want to actually see some relief for our families, our communities. There's a tremendous amount of anxiety for working class people about, if they don't do the right thing, or even if they do the right thing, that someone in some corporate office is going to decide, well, your community's next. I think about Lordstown or Belvedere under GM or Stellantis. Those plants were some of the most productive plants in their entire organization, and they couldn't do enough to keep it open. And I would just, comment, on the Chinese issue, we want to make sure companies play fairly, but our bigger issue and what we see a lot of our anxiety about is about American companies or German companies or Swedish companies, how they act in Mexico and how they act in the US, and that downward pressure that we're facing. And I don't doubt that a Chinese boss will be just as vicious and just as problematic, but we want to keep a focus on making sure the rules are written so workers themselves get ahead and it isn't just at the expense of allowing this corporation to be able to compete against Chinese companies, but making sure that workers come out ahead in all this as well.
Thank you very much, Jason, from the UAW. And now it's my honor to introduce Rory Hausman. He is the Legislative Director of the United Steelworkers, and he is somebody who has been very intimately involved in these issues as a steelworker member and now as their Legislative Director in Washington, D.C. Please, Rory.
Thank you so much, Lori. I really appreciate Rethink Trade making time for this, and all the Representative Dingell and Deluzio, and honestly for the congressional staff that are spending their time here. Look, United Steelworkers is a union with about 850,000 active and retired members across a broad array of industries. While we're, say, it's USW or Steelworkers, we're the largest union in paper, rubber, glass, refining, chemical. We have massive membership throughout the energy-intensive trade-exposed industries. And as such, we've had to learn quite a bit about tariff policy over the decades. And I think that it is important that out of the International Trade Commission and the International Trade Administration in the Department of Commerce have been doing enforcement of our trade rules and laws for decades now. And right now, there are 716 orders, anti-dumping and countervailing duty orders against dumped and illegally subsidized goods coming into the country by state-owned enterprises, foreign governments, and private corporations that have tried to capture market share, hurt domestic workers, and undermine domestic employment. Out of those 716 orders, our union has been a participant to about 20% of those cases. And I say this is an important piece. These specific, particular item trade cases, our membership works at these, whether it is a brass plant, tire plant, or steel plants. And though our membership is engaged in those trade cases, and they have learned that tariffs have preserved their employment and their job. So when messaging goes out against tariffs generally, a lot of our membership instinctually starts thinking about the trade case that protected and saved their job. And so I want to also then pivot to the 301 and 232 tariffs. Those have been very instrumental in pushing back against market concentration, primarily in the People's Republic of China, and a host of other countries where excess capacity in the steel industry has really negatively impacted the ability of U.S. firms to recapitalize, has reduced employment in the United States, and has really caused significant issues. Now, that ability, and this is important, particularly if you are concerned about carbon emissions or any of these other items. The U.S. is really low carbon intensity for the steel industry. Globally, our low carbon intensity in the steel industry, however, has not led to our ability to compete globally. And the U.S. is dependent currently about 20% of imports. And so this idea that we would modernize our steel industry and yet at the same time face an onslaught of low cost, artificially dumped and subsidized goods into the U.S. market really impacts our ability to create change in climate policy and also, quite frankly, manufacturing policy. And if you look back at the 232 and 301 report that the International Trade Commission put together just last year, I think it's important to note that in that report, many of the importers and producers in submitted testimony suggested that many importers largely absorbed higher importer prices through decreased profit margins and not passing those prices on to consumers. So this is something that's really key for us, is that there is literally examples of when importers are put on oath, they say that they just lowered their profit margin and did not pass on that price to consumers. And I think another key piece here, and we all, as on the Democratic side of the aisle, need to really be careful here, is that corporate taxes are at their lowest level in over a century. With such a low level, the ability to raise revenue or increase a little bit on tariff policy is something we could do if we make sure that these corporations and multinationals aren't passing those directly on to consumers. And that will be something that we're going to really have to work hard on. But I think it's something that we know, at least from the steelworkers and a lot of our membership, are very instinctually ready to be. That's why we've been so ready to defend tariff policy. Another area here, and we have to get smarter on this, is that this is not 1974. It doesn't take decades or years to build a factory. A new solar module factory from planning to production can be done in about 12 months. And so when you think about that, you need more dynamic tariff policy. And so as my brothers from the machinists and from the auto workers have said, this ability to raise and adjust and have more dynamic tariff policy is something that we do need in this country. Because if we see targeted and quick moving dumping of products, or the ability of Belt and Road Initiative funding, for example, to quickly prop up a factory and start dumping in from another country, we have to be able to adjust those tariffs in a more rapid way. And a lot of our trade enforcement laws, you require 3 years of background data to prove injury. So for a lot of our workers, waiting 3 years is a long time. And then too many of them don't want to sit on the unemployment line for 12 months, hoping that they get back to work after tariffs get put in place. So I think these are all items, and just kind of for your knowledge, to kind of intersperse a little bit of the data that from our union, that how we perceive and how we see tariff policy needing to be more dynamic, more engaging, and ensuring that we're actually growing domestic manufacturing, mining, other places where we know that it is very easy for industry to move production. And then two, particularly in commodities such as mined materials and others, we know that it is not fair for an American miner to have to compete against such low environmental and labor standards. Looking at nickel as a prime example in Indonesia, the acid bath process to make high-grade nickel for EV batteries is extremely toxic and has long-term detrimental health impacts, both for workers and for the communities around them. And I just don't believe that in America today that any people would really want to say that they just want to pass on long-term cancer and disease to people in Indonesia, as opposed to doing it properly under safe working and health conditions in the United States. And so I think these are just a few examples of why we need to be careful and conscious about how we approach tariff policy in this upcoming administration, and pushing back against the worst abuses of labor, environmental law, and our trade laws. And so combined with what my brothers and sisters have said so far, I really hope, and siblings have said so far, I really hope this has been helpful, and I'll pass it back to you, Lori.
Roy, thank you very much. So with that, I'm going to go first to the question that I think is a key one we're all struggling with, which is, and I'd love to hear all of the speakers' thoughts on this, which is, how do we present a clear and unified message?
Oh, well, I'll jump in. Roy Houseman with the Steelworkers. I wanted to say that I think for us, creating distinction for us is being able to highlight how tariffs need to be used to defend workers' rights, to improve working conditions, and ensure that we aren't losing jobs here in the US. So there is this ability to be able to say, we don't want to raise tariffs on bananas, but we want to protect workers who are mining, milling, and producing the jobs here in America, and should be competing fairly. And I think that that's a key element for us. And I think that's one of the things that we see is a great way of being able to say, and it's not fair, for example, for the European Union to have a 10% tariff on primary aluminum while the US has a 0% tariff. So these ideas that we know are out there and that are very much at play are things that we can push back on so that we are creating a level playing field. And that is a key piece here, is a level playing field. When European Union, another great example, has a 10% tariff on vehicles, same with the United Kingdom, it's really hard for US firms to compete when we have a 2.7% tariff coming in from the Euro. So these sorts of things are places where, if done correctly, we would even, and we would then have that discussion about how to lower in the future, as opposed to letting one side get just straight profit by shipping into the US market compared to a US firm trying to ship into the European market. But I may have stolen a little bit of Jason Wade's thunder there. Sorry.
Jason.
No, that's fine. But also it's understanding what's the stated purpose of the tariff. And some of it, there will be probably tariffs that are towards rebalancing. And like to your point, Europe having a 10% tariff on autos and that just being fundamentally unfair. But I think there's also going to be other tariffs that are meant to be used as a bargaining chip. And if that's the case, we should be making sure that those chips are environmental protection, our worker protection. Like a Mexican auto worker makes on average $3 an hour, and they work for U.S. and they work for German firms. Like BMW plant in San Luis Potosí make $1.50 an hour. It's abhorrent and it's criminal, and it's the Western companies doing that. And if we're going to use tariffs to leverage good things, we should be using it to increase the buying power of workers everywhere, and that will actually grow the economy. And finally, one other point is recognizing that everywhere that there's going to be tariff increases that may have an impact on price, we're also workers. And the real question is, what does it do to our buying power? If wages go up proportionally to the increase in costs, so what? It isn't actually a negative impact. It may psychologically have a negative impact, but it actually doesn't decrease our buying power. So
Yeah, if I could, the one thing I would throw in terms of messaging from what we've tested in the polling is I'm going to be talking about building things, that aspect of we used to build things here as part of the kind of nostalgia people think that Trump and Republicans are tapping into in their version of this. We want to be talking about we want to be building things here at home, investing in American workers and good, high-paying jobs, and we stand up for that and reveal the ways in which Trump and the Republicans are actually undercutting American workers and good paying jobs. That's a sweet spot where Democrats can step in, but they have to be hammering it and consistent on it, which they have, which we all know we haven't done.
Son, any last words, or shall I wind us up?
Oh no, I agree with everyone. But we need to use specific. We need to show that empty plant. We need to show that job that was lost and went to Mexico and went to China. Explain why, and just talk about how specific tariffs could have prevented it. Now, there's going to be a solution to everything? No, but we have to call it out. It just didn't shut down for no reason. We do have productive workforce. We have great workers. We just need a level playing field in order for us to compete, and tariffs are tools that we can use to do that.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for sharing all of your knowledge and wisdom. Everyone who tuned in, thank you so much for finding an hour to spend on this. And what's very interesting is I think we need a second session because we now have had a bunch of questions come in that we could be talking about for another hour. They're going to have to hold. Each of the speakers has great stuff on their websites to learn more about all of this. Thank you again very, very much. And with that, goodbye, everyone. Our webinar is over.